coaching with neuroscience? The goal of coaching with neuroscience is to connect with the emotional state of the client. Why? Because we are all emotional beings, and our major part of the behavior is influenced by limbic system, limbic brain. So unless you connect with the client's emotional state, you cannot activate client. Then you need to understand the motive behind what client is looking for, because what client is looking for is above the water level. But why client is looking for what client is looking for? So what is the motive of the client? Once you understand the motive, then maybe your action plan, not maybe, in most of the cases, your action plan changes. Because that motive can be achieved through a variety of the ways, and that may not be the stated goal of the client. So a neuroscience coach understands the importance of the going to the motive and understanding the client or the client's goal or problem below the waterline. And neuroscience coach will always work on the identity of the client, not on the problem of the client or the goal of the client, not on the behavior of the client, but on the identity of the client, because the identity is ruled by your brain. And once you change identity, result follows automatically. So that is the beauty, or that is the wisdom what neuroscience coach has. So what is this coaching model for neuroscience? Right. So of course, few of you even can specialize yourself as a neuroscience coach. So when you establish connection with the coachee, and when you are neuroscience coach and you understand neuroscience coaching, you always establish bond with the identity of the client. You focus on the identity of the client. You understand the beliefs, values, strengths, behavioral profile of the client. You make client more self-aware. You understand the habit and the patterns, habitual patterns of the client. That is how you understand the client at a connection level, and you develop connection with the client. So you know what to understand in level 1, in coaching process phase 1. In coaching phase 2, you basically look behind the motive. What is the root cause? What is the motive? Why you are looking for what you are looking for? What is the larger picture? And what are the emotions associated with the goal? Why you want to achieve? What you are feeling right now when you are not achieving it, and after achieving it, what emotions you will feel, right? That is what you will understand. Why? Because finally, client is looking for that emotion, that pleasure, right? That pleasure or whatever that particular positive emotion client is looking for. Why? Because that emotion again can be achieved through various ways, not necessarily the stated way. So you establish emotional bond and you understand emotions associated with the goal of the client. During the discover phase, you go for a cognitive restructuring. Of course, I'm in this particular webinar, I'm not covering the cognitive restructuring, but the cognitive restructuring is a process where you activate your prefrontal cortex. In connection phase, in outcome phase, as well as in discovery phase, you definitely activate the limbic system and the emotional brain. But you can't stop only at the emotional brain. You have to match emotional brain and your cognitive brain, which is your prefrontal cortex. So the cognitive restructuring is a scientific technique wherein you ask pertinent questions and you let the client realize the reality by looking at the things from a logical and a third perspective. This is called as cognitive restructuring. In a discovery phase, you go for a root cause analysis and you go for emotional realignment. Because many times you become emotional about that particular success, what you are looking for, or goal you are looking for. But it might happen that after achieving that goal, you still will not feel successful. Why? Because you wanted that emotion and you thought that achievement of that will realize you that emotion. So that particular goal is just a pathway to that emotion. So you basically align that emotions. And there is one principle called as positive emotional attractor. So wherein you align client's motivation to this positive emotional attractor, that is, okay, if you want to feel the way you want to feel, if you want to have this particular emotion, right, now you align the action plan with that particular emotion. So this is called as positive emotional attractor. So that emotion, that future emotion, that future pacing, the client always will be self-motivated to act on the action plan, what has been co-designed between the coach and coachee. Why? Because now the coach understands the emotions and the neuroscience behind the habit formation and the achievement of the goal. That is the maturity what neuroscience coach has. In action, apart from the mindfulness, which is the most important aspect of neuroscience, you basically work on the identity in the neurological level. There are 6 neurological levels, which I will just brief you after this slide. So a neuroscience coach understands each level and especially focus on the level of identity. Because once you change the identity, everything automatically change and you get results. Right. So this is the focus of a neuro. So what technique or the what processes or what methodologies neuroscience coach uses? One of the way is cognitive restructuring, CBT, and another way is neurological levels. One more way is changing the limiting core beliefs, which is part of our who am I. Another way is to use the principles of atomic habits, what James Clear video we just saw, and that particular book will be shared with you, ebook will be shared with you. And again, what we are learning in our positive psychology flow, how you will enable client to reach the state of flow. That is the value addition of a neuroscience coach, enabling client to go in a state of flow. And what is the progress from the perspective of the neuroscience coach? The progress is emotional intelligence and mental maturity of the client. That's it. That is the goal. Once client becomes emotional intelligent and mentally mature, goals, problems become trivial. So you need to self-direct the client towards neural plasticity. You need to self-direct the client towards behavioral change and positive habit formation. And the goal of neuroscience coaching is mental fitness. Once this is in your control, life is in your control. That is the goal of the neuroscience coaching. And this is the model or the process of neuroscience coaching. Of course, in this particular webinar, you will not master the neuroscience coaching, but you now understand what neuroscience coaching means. And once you know, if you are more interested, now you can learn more about the neuroscience coaching, and few of you can even specialize in neuroscience coaching. So these are the neurological levels I was talking about. So they have been smartly taken by NLP, but the root of the neurological levels is into neuroscience. And since NLP is a combination of neuro-linguistic programming, they have taken this wonderful tool or methodology from the neuroscience called as neurological levels, in which many times the client explains you the environment and behavior. Environment and behavior is the top of the iceberg. It is above the water level. But the environment, and when you work on the environment and the behavior, many times either you don't get result or you get a temporary result. Below the water line are the skills, capabilities, values, beliefs, identity, and the larger picture or the your mental frame or the mentality. right? And when you focus on the identity, everything you have to relate to the identity. Why you think what you are thinking, why you are seeing what you are seeing. Of course, you will not ask this direct question, but with the meaningful questioning, you will understand the root, the motive of why client is saying what client is saying, and then you work on the identity of the client. So this is how a neuroscience coach utilizes neurological levels and the questioning related to the neurological levels effectively in coaching.